Hello, amateurs. Welcome to another episode of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some wonderful rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host, Tim, and I've got another amazing guest for you today. This man has appeared on the podcast before, and in a complete coincidence, it was exactly 100 episodes ago in episode number 16. Go back and listen to that one to find out all about the man and his career. But this episode will be concentrating on something he's taken a really deep interest in over the last few years, and that is players transitioning out of the game. And he's even taken the time to create a course to help people with that. Please welcome Mr. Geoff Griffiths. Geoff, how are you?
Hi, Tim. Yeah, really good. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for having me back on 100 episode later. Yeah, been really enjoying listening to it, in the interim. But yeah, it's great to be back. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Can you believe that was actually nearly 4 years ago, that episode?
I can't. And in the spirit of the time, as we did it face to face. And now look at us. Now look at us on Zoom like everyone else.
Indeed. And do you remember why your episode ended up being number 16 rather than number 15?
I don't know. Tell me.
It's because of your dislike of odd numbers.
Well, and that is something that I carried through, from rugby, isn't it? So yeah, sorry about that. But it's good that we're back at 116 again. If it was 117, I'd be in big trouble.
Indeed. Okay, but we're here to talk about transition today, the transition out of the game. And we'll start off. Why is it such a challenge for so many players?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot to it. It's kind of, you spend your whole life kind of chasing a dream. So if you're really good and you've kind of got everything that it takes, you invest an enormous amount in trying to achieve a goal or your dream or however you want to frame it. And it's quite all encompassing, and if you think about sort of the numbers of the people that do genuinely make it, and that's in any sport, not just rugby, is like the odds of making it are very slim, but someone's got to, right? And how do you achieve that? You have to be all in. And rugby's kind of a fascinating environment because there's loads going on, isn't there? There's kind of the financial sort of unsteadiness, I guess, the interplay between the amateur game and the professional game, and that messy middle in between. It's a very complicated landscape, and there's lots of different routes that people can take to make the top. And on that basis, there's lots of routes they can take to drop out of the game. So I just got really, really interested in it in terms of looking at how I transitioned out of the game. And I was by no means a superstar. And in some ways, I think that was a blessing. But yeah, I've just taken a real interest in it because I don't think it's something that's catered for enough, particularly by rugby clubs. And if you look at any sport, no one's incentivized to help people leave the game, are they? They're incentivized to maximize performance. So often what you'll find in elite sport is an enormous amount of infrastructure and systems and processes designed to extract maximum performance, help someone get to the best they could possibly be. Yet there's absolutely nothing for when they drop out typically.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that I thought about quite a lot recently myself as well. I think there's a lot of players, a huge amount of players who have the potential to make it to the elite. But as you've said, obviously only the very few do. So, talk to me about what it must feel like for those players who've invested all that amount of time, but, for whatever reason, whether it actually ends up being talent or luck or fortune or injuries, don't quite make it.
I think what's interesting about it is like the things that are going to happen are the same for everybody. So it kind of doesn't matter how you exit the game. And you're right, like there's so many people that make it or there's a lot of people that don't make it that perhaps should have made it. And I was having a really interesting discussion with someone the other day, and he was saying like he really did make it, and he was like, honestly, so much of my career was luck. It was kind of like a coach taking the right interest, and so you have this huge pool of players where they may genuinely believe that they could have been a world beater or whatever. And I think fundamentally the challenges are the same, regardless of whether you really, really make it to the top of your sport or whether you have just a happy amateur career and then you stop playing one day. What we've kind of looked at is there are 7 things that are going to happen. They'll happen at different severities as a whole. They'll happen as different severities per item, as it were. But they are going to happen. And it's interesting. I think like the higher you go, it's almost like the further you could fall. And you see the people that make the top of the game, they're kind of, you know, that they might have a media career, or they might be able to do that kind of thing just because they're so well known. But even then, is it, is that their calling? Is that, were they really fulfilled to do that? Is that what brings them real happiness and joy? It's like a thing that I'm really, really interested in, because it's kind of an outcome of the career they had. It's not necessarily where they want to be going in the future. There's lots of people that, are destined for the stars, and then an injury takes them out, and so that's literally from one day to the next, they are destined for everything, and then it falls to pieces. And that's obviously really, really tough. And then you have people that kind of slowly manage their way out of the game, and that's essentially what I did. So you played with me, Tim. I wasn't a world beater. I had real aspirations to play and to make the Premiership or to play sevens or whatever it was, and I never did it. And the way I describe it is I was kind of blessed by mediocrity, and I realized, at the age of sort of 24, 25, 26, something like that, that actually it wasn't going to happen. And I wanted to look forward and just be really, really in control of how I departed the game. And what that meant for me was taking a step down, playing in National One, building a career at the same time, and just really, really dovetailing them and looking at rugby as a very different part of my life, not everything that it's, that I'm pinning my hopes on, basically. And it's mad how much more I enjoyed rugby once I had seen it for what I think it should have been for me, versus trying to chase this dream. So I kind of was lucky, I guess, in that regard. But there are so many stories, and there's lots of really tragic stories, and that's the thing that really kind of inspired myself and my sister to sort of build this course that we built. Like Christoph Dominici was kind of the reason we did it. If you remember back in 2020, he killed himself, and that was just a real, you grow up watching someone and they're like, a real inspiration to you. He's a bit of a different type of winger to what I was, but just an unbelievable player and character, and to think that for whatever reason he's made that sort of set of decisions, it just got me really thinking about where's the support to help people transition out of that stardom into normal life, I guess.
Yeah, and we kind of alluded to it halfway through this, really, but obviously the stars, they'll find it very difficult in some ways. But is this just relevant to professional players, or is it relevant to anybody who kind of plays rugby to, I guess, any kind of sort of serious level?
It's relevant for absolutely anybody. I think it's magnified by the things you can achieve in elite sport. So, be that money, be that wins, Olympic medals, like whatever the sport, whatever the outcomes, all of the things that we talk about in tackling transition in the course are all very much relevant. So, for example, the biggest one that I come up against again and again and again when I speak to people is about their sense of identity. And I don't know how you feel, Tim, but do you identify as a rugby player in some part, or have you in the past?
100%. And that was probably the single hardest thing for me when I left the game. Was a lot of my self-worth was wrapped up in that completely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is what's interesting is I think regardless of the level you play, you will identify as that. So like at uni, you've got the uni rugby players. At school, I remember, there's the rugby team. You get introduced. Everything reinforces it. You get introduced. Oh, this is Geoff. He's a rugby player. Or what do you do in your spare time? It's such a normal question to ask. And in normal life, regardless of the level you play, in normal life, you will say, "Oh, I'm a rugby player. I am a rugby player," and that kind of definition of who you essentially are is. The reality is that's not who you are. It's just a thing that you do. The interesting thing about professional sport is if you think about everything that reinforces that. So if you're an amateur, or say you just play down your local club, you do that, you train Tuesday, Thursday, you play on Sunday, whatever. People still refer to you as a rugby player. If everything around you as a professional then reinforces that, so everything you eat, when you sleep, how you train, why you do certain things that you do, your routines, your schedules, the way that you earn money, the thing that says who's paying you every month, it all says I am a rugby player. And I think regardless of the level someone plays, I think that's the big one that people really struggle with. And the interesting thing about it is it's such a lot to unpack. There's so many different ways you can come at it. We come at it from kind of a Western psychology standpoint, but there's a load of sort of Eastern philosophy stuff that also plays into it. So I think that's one of the big ones. And I think another one is community. And I think that's like a really for rugby, community is massive, and like you are going to lose a sense of community when you stop playing rugby. Again, when you're full time, that environment that I had for a few years while I was full time was you just hang around with your mates the whole time. If you're not at the rugby club training, you go for coffee, you go to the beach, like whatever it is you're doing it with the same people. Even like the fans, you hang around after the game. There is a real sense of community, and it's the same in the amateur game. You go down your local club, you go for a few beers, you do like all of this stuff. Is that it's a proper community, and when that goes away, you lose a big part of that. And so they're the two things I think are really transient throughout the whole transition process, regardless of sort of the level you played. But it's interesting, you're saying like you identified with it, and like, but now how do you see yourself? Like, are you Tim the ex-rugby player, or are you still a rugby guy, or like what does it play for you now? Do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I'd say both, right? I do consider myself an ex-rugby player, but I don't like that's not sort of who I am as such now. It's just what I was. And well, now I've got a rugby podcast, so it's still very much part of my life, So yeah, but it's interesting. I've kind of gone through a bit of a period of sort of personal, I don't know, discovery, I guess, to try and figure out who I was, because a lot of my life, well, the majority of my life was wrapped up in being involved in rugby clubs as a player and a coach afterwards as well. So, yeah, I identify with it a lot. Now, do you think rugby players are more likely to suffer compared to maybe other sports, or do you think other sports have similar problems?
I think it's a really good question. I think there are certain things in rugby structurally that lend themselves, like I said, to certain aspects of transition being more tough than others. I think with rugby, like I said, the community aspect's massive. Like, it's such a social game, like regardless of the level, and everything you do sort of revolves around it in some way. You're either looking forward to seeing your mates, or you're reminiscing about the night out you've just had, or whatever it is. I think the identity stuff's massive. But I think all of these things exist in other sports, and certainly having since launched the course, it hasn't just been rugby players I'm speaking to. I'm speaking sort of Olympians, to people in random sports, or even just random careers that actually departing that career to do something else is a really big kind of hit on who they are or how they feel about themselves. But I think there are certain patterns in rugby, essentially. Like, I think those two are really big: community and identity. The other one that kind of hits everything, regardless, and the first module of the course that we built on purpose, is the idea of inevitability. So that's an interesting one, because your career is going to end, right? And it's this whole thing of like the way, how do you deal with that? Like, do you fully face it front on and you say, okay, I'm going to really enjoy it for what it is now, and live in the moment, and accept that it's going to come to an end, and whatever it is, unless you've got like your vets who are playing at like 70 or whatever it is that some people do, which is mad. Or you can kind of deny that it's going to happen and just ignore it. And obviously, from where we kind of sit, it's kind of better to deal with it. But that's the unifying factor, I think. The one thing that is unifying across everything is that nobody plays forever, regardless of the sport. And in many ways, that's one of the biggest things to overcome. Like, you can't really do anything until you begin to accept that idea. The interesting balance for an elite sportsman is, okay, I know it's going to come to an end. How do I give it everything without giving everything? And that's the balance that we try and help people with in the course.
Yeah. Okay. You spoke about how you approached your transition earlier, and in a very sort of conscious manner. How did it actually turn out? Like, how did you feel about it as it was happening, as you went through it, and now a few years afterwards?
I feel like really, really lucky, to be honest, like in terms of like the way it all transpired, because I played with a lot of people who when I was full time, if you look at the teams I was playing with, was in the champion, in the RFU champ, it was like a load of people really made it, a load of people really didn't, and then a load of people just stayed in the middle, and just kind of kept churning out and kind of, yeah. But as you know, the money's not amazing in rugby, and so where I got to with it was, a lot was led by enjoyment. Like, was I enjoying what I was doing? And I just felt like it was beginning to run out. I had a lot of injuries. like a lot of setbacks on that kind of thing, and probably just didn't have the natural talent as well. And all of those things compounded for me to be able to realize that it probably wasn't going to happen. So when it happened, it was just about being very deliberate about it and saying, okay, I'm going to reframe what rugby is for me. And at the time, I'd moved to Esher where we played together. So I'd gone from being full-time to go to Esher. And the amazing thing about Esher was that you could play in the championship, but also have a job in London. So you could get your career going and that was kind of the first step, I guess, in terms of, okay, actually, there's a bit more to life here than just trying to chase this dream. And I had a couple of years at Esher and had another bad injury, and I just thought, well, I need to sort of change something up. And I just focused really on work, and I went and played for Blackheath, which is where I finished my career. I played 7 years at Blackheath in National 1. And when I look back, it was the most enjoyable rugby that I ever played. And it was the lowest level. And the reason I think for that is because I'd really compartmentalized rugby. And I said, actually, this is a thing that I'm just going to enjoy. And this is a thing that's going to give me balance away from work. It's going to be a release. It's going to be a load of silliness with my mates. And that was the kind of interesting thing for me, is I genuinely think I played better rugby just because I was enjoying myself more, and I just framed it differently. And the flip side of that was that at the same time I could go and build a career, and so I kind of did a few jobs I didn't really enjoy just to kind of learn the ropes, and rugby was amazing for that because it kind of took the financial pressure off, and I could just take a few risks, go and try and carve out a career path, and that's kind of, again, a really big part of why I've ended up owning Built Visible and growing this agency and all the stuff I do in my professional life. Is so much of it comes down to rugby, but so much of that comes down to actually beginning to understand myself and what I wanted. So
yeah, that's a big part of it for sure. Now, when I was getting towards the end of my career, the biggest amount of advice I ever got was something along the lines of, you're a long time retired, which, just makes you think that, your career is a short one relatively. That's fairly sort of blunt. What are some of the sort of more subtler aspects of transition that maybe people aren't talking about quite so much?
It's a really, really good question. I think the way I'll answer that is, like, I'll talk about like the penny drop moment I had, right? So the background of all of this is, course I built is with my sister, who's a clinical psychologist. So, and we just got talking about, the process of transitioning out, and what she's amazing with is kind of giving you, she essentially helps you structure your own thinking, right? And that just allows you to make sense of things. And one of the things she said to me that was this massive penny drop moment was she introduced this idea to me of compound losses. And the way that kind of works is, like, when you lose something, what it's saying is, like, yes, you lose the thing. So maybe, let's say I blew my knee and my career was over tomorrow playing rugby. Okay, I've lost my rugby career. But the thing that makes it really, really tough is everything else around that. So, like, I've actually also lost that sense of structure with my training, the habits I'm in with my eating and the gym, and when I go to training, and all of my mates, and this competitive itch. And you actually lose everything else because of that one thing at the top. And it's like when you lose someone that you love, is like you miss them, but it's not, it is them, but it's also all of the stuff around it. So you may have, like, gone to the pub with that person, you may have gone and done all these things. And this idea of compound losses, like, really gave me this big penny drop moment of, like, that's why it's so difficult. And I think, to answer your question in kind of a roundabout way, is, like, that's where I think all the subtlety lies in transition, because it's the stuff that you don't expect. Like, there's all this obvious stuff, and there's kind of, like, there are these things like, you're a long time retired, or like, oh, you'll miss all your mates, or oh, you'll still do some competitive stuff. It's just not as simple as that. And the human mind works in a very, very strange way, but the way it tries to deal with all of these other things that residually come out of one loss is where I think all of the challenges. But then what we're trying to do with the course is to help people understand that idea as a concept exists. Because if I now understand compound losses, one day, if I'm looking at, I don't watch much rugby anymore at all, but, like, say I'm watching a game on the TV. I'll tell you what, I'll tell you a story. It's like, I've been to maybe 3 rugby games since I retired in 2019. Like, I really just haven't watched any rugby. One of them, I went with my dad, and we went up to watch, I just got some random free tickets to Leicester. So I went up to Leicester to watch them play a game, and I was watching all the boys warm up, and I was just like, oh my God, that looks terrible. I don't miss any of it at all. And there were lots of things in the game where I was watching people get smashed, and I thought, oh God, that looks awful. And then at the end, when it was done, and they were all clapping each other off and all that, the classic like rugby stuff where you clap each other off the tunnel. And I was like, oh, that was a great thing about rugby. That was such a lovely thing. And that's like a perfect example where like, I had no idea when I turned up and put my ticket in the gate to go and watch that game that I would miss that thing. I probably went into it thinking, oh, rugby, sod it, I haven't looked at it for ages. As soon as those boys are clapping each other off the tunnel, I was like, oh, they're going to go into the changing rooms, have a load of beers. Oh, they're going to go out tonight and have a great time. Oh, they're going to get together tomorrow for the recovery session. They're all minging with a hangover. And it's just, that's like a perfect example of compound losses. It's this random thing at the end of a long strain of ideas that actually, like, you're like, yeah, actually, I do miss that. And then the important thing to do with that is just recognize it. And then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, rather than get upset about it or whatever. It's just like, oh, that's interesting. I'm curious as to why I feel like that. And that's kind of the power of all this stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's a great story. Now, just in terms of like the current landscape, do you think there's ever been a time where more players are leaving rugby at one time, obviously with the collapse of Wasps and Worcester and just the professional game shrinking in the UK? Is this like a real pinch point now at this moment?
I mean, it's chaos, isn't it? It's complete chaos. And the thing that kind of upsets me about it is it's always the players that are going to suffer. It's just a fundamental lack of management. And again, since launching the course, like I've had so many conversations with clubs across the spectrum. And like I said at the beginning, like rugby is such an interesting game because you've got like the amateur game is so linked to the semi-professional game, which is so linked to the professional game. And what you've got is a load of players dropping out at the top. And at the scale that it's happened with Wasps, Worcester and Irish, is there's only so many places those players can go. Like it's not like they can just go to the other clubs because of salary caps and financial restraints. And then to compound that, like France is full, Italy's full. So like, where are these boys going to go? Like it really is tough. And like I said, there's loads of semi-professional clubs who are sort of licking their lips. Like one of the really interesting byproducts of launching the course was I had a load of National One clubs and Championship clubs get in touch to say, oh, if you speak to any players that are looking for a gig, like feel free to sort of let us know, right? And it like literally there was like 4 or 5 DORs got in touch with me from Nat One and Championship clubs. And that's kind of the route, isn't it? That's the only place these guys can go. And it's really tough because they're not prepared for that. They've signed, maybe a year or maybe 2-year contract or whatever with a Premiership club, expecting that that's their livelihood. And then just financial mismanagement has pulled the rug from under them. And it's your classic, like we talk in the course, we've got a matrix about sort of how you want to transition out the game. It's kind of a dual axis matrix where the ideal world scenario is that you've planned your retirement and you've decided to retire, right? And that's kind of right up there. The flip side, and basically very, very few people get to do that. So you get your kind of like Richie McCaw's, like, go out after, okay, well done, Richie, well done you. There are very, very few people that do that. The bottom side of that axis is that you haven't planned anything and that you've been forced out of the game. And essentially what you're looking at there is, well, they're being forced out of the game because mismanagement financially and administratively has meant that their club's folded. And then the big variable is how much someone's planned it. And the issue is you're not really going to be accounting for your club to go under. Like you're not really doing your prep for your post-career career thinking that'll be the way it'll end. Which kind of places more importance on doing it if it's that fragile. But yeah, it's a really, really sort of sorry state of affairs. And yeah, like I said, the thing that irks me is that it's just the players that suffer. You've got hugely talented individuals that have given everything, and through no fault of their own, it's ending. The interesting question is like, where does the fault begin to get picked up by them in terms of the planning they have done post-career, which is a really complicated issue. But fundamentally, when you sign a contract, you should expect it to last through. But all these clubs reliant on a money man, it's just not sustainable, is it? It's not a model that works, and it's just worrying for everyone else. I think there's a few clubs that kind of get it and that I think are doing things in the right way. But yeah, it's just worrying how many else, how many more are going to happen like that.
Yeah. So are you going to start up as a player's agent as well now, Geoff? Or
I've got I mean, I should do. I've had like so many people have been in touch. Like, I think that's the interesting thing though, is like it has been, it's kind of ruined my evenings. Like, like I've got my day job to do, and this was just a bit of a passion project building this course. But so many like clubs and individuals, obviously more players than clubs, have been in touch, and sort of DM'd me or whatever, and I've had so many catch ups, and these are with like anything from full internationals, multiple caps, played in World Cups, through to kids at the beginning of their career who are kind of like, should I go for it? And it's I'm not a professional career advisor. We're just trying to help people think and help them understand themselves. We're just trying to increase their own self-awareness. But yeah, the demand of it is like, maybe I should become an agent. I think there's loads that agents could be doing to help people with this as well. But again, it's like, where's the incentive? Like if you're an agent, then you're making money off your players' contracts. So why would you incentivize them to do something that wasn't the contract? Because your job is to maximize your own revenue by maximizing their revenue. And the way you do that is through the club. And the way you do that is through extracting all the performance. So it's a really tricky one. But to be fair, like what I will say, just again, through conversations that I've had with players, coaches, people who run these organizations, like CEOs, like I do think there are a couple of Premiership clubs that really understand it. And those two for sure are Sale and Saracens. And I can, from the conversations I've had, is like, I know full well that they look at the more holistic picture. They look at it as, actually, if we can make more like better rounded individuals who like really understand themselves and have more going on in their life than just rugby, we think that will benefit our sporting organisation and our outcomes and our results. Guess who was in the Premiership final this year, right? And it's really interesting testament, I think, to them just taking a more holistic approach to their people rather than just, right, we're going to maximise the rugby, like the on-pitch performance, and focus everything around that.
Yeah. Now you've talked a lot. You've given a lot of tips in here already. But is there anything else? Any more tactics that players can start to use to sort of prepare for transition, or if they're in transition already? Is there anything else you'd like to sort of add at this point?
Yeah, I think there's like honestly, there's so much advice out there. My issue with a lot of it is it's very, very generic. So there's lots of people, like mental health and mental well-being is this whole thing now that, everyone feels like they have to do it. So certainly in our corporate world, it's like a lot of people are just box ticking because everyone else is doing it. And it's like, well, that's a good thing, I guess, in a way. But equally, there's a lot of generic advice, like, it's good to talk. And like, okay, I agree. Like as blokes, like we're probably quite bad at that. But I would ask, like, okay, to who? About what? In what forum? Using what model? Like there's loads and loads of questions that I don't think people come. It's just the understanding around it's not enough and not widespread enough. So I mean, I would even look at like the outline of our course. So we built 7 modules, and each of them is a really big area of something. You will be affected by this in any kind of transition. Even just looking at those 7 ideas is more structure than most people get in terms of advice around mental health. I think there's loads of different ways you can look at it. Like we've taken a very, very clinical approach to looking at this. Like I said, there's a whole Eastern philosophical side that people can explore. But again, what do you even Google to start that journey? And there's loads of different approaches as well. So like like there's loads of guys doing really good stuff around coaching. So Sam Smith, who would have played with at Esher, he's doing some great stuff with transitioning players using coaching methodologies. Callum Wilson, another guy that you may have played with at Esher, amazing stuff around coaching, and helping people extract performance that way. We've taken a clinical view. I think the amount of talking here just shows how complicated it all is. And I just think it's about getting as specific as possible. So like if I said to someone anything, it's like, you don't even need to go in and buy the course. You can see the modules. We talk about inevitability, we talk about loss, purpose and identity, community structure, self-sufficiency and balance. And they are the 7 things that will be affected by a transition. And just an understanding that those are 7 things that are going to happen is more, I think, than people typically give when they just say, oh, it's good to talk to your mates. I think we need to be more specific about it, but there's quite a few knowledge gaps around how to do that. So that's what I would always say around, just begin to get a bit more specific and begin to get a bit more of an understanding of the options available to you, because there's loads. I just think it's about accessing them properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now the course itself, how long is it, when did you build it? How long has it been around?
So we had the idea. I actually only launched it in March. It took us a few years for various reasons to actually get it up and running. But the reason it came about was in 2020, in that kind of hiatus over lockdown. I went up and stayed with my sister. So she had a little girl. Went and stayed with them for a while. And like I said, Nicola's a clinical psychologist, and it was around the time that Christophe Dominici killed himself, and we were sort of just talking about it. And we were like, Nicola was just so interested in, okay, like, well, how are these things allowed to happen? And I know it, again, it's like at least a few people once removed who have, tragically sort of ended their lives because of a very sudden transition out of sport. And we were getting talking about it, and Nicola's basically done a lot of work with the military, and it's exactly the same. Essentially, the things you lose by transitioning out of rugby are the exact same you lose from transitioning out of the military. She's done a lot of work with veterans. And we were just talking about it. And essentially what we've done is we've just taken her clinical expertise and kind of years of experience. I mean, she really is the brains behind it. And all I've done is kind of used my digital marketing knowledge to say, okay, let's productize this. Let's make it easily accessible, digestible, and build something, again, from my rugby experience, that empowers the players. Like, we need to empower the players because I don't think anyone else is going to do it. So the two ideas were make it super accessible, make it really empowering. And we just did a lot of brainstorming around, okay, let's make these 7 modules really clear and easy to understand. And all the course really consists of is 7 kind of extended conversations between myself and Nicola. So I'm kind of giving my perspective on, this is what it looks like to transition out of rugby. She gives her clinical view on that and kind of starts to label things, give things names, models, gives us metaphor to work with and kind of expand our understanding around it. And then after each of those big videos, there's kind of 3 to 5 guided exercises that are kind of one-on-one with just Nicola, where she uses we built a load of interactive worksheets. She kind of has you do exercises that kind of, again, just structure your own thinking and help you understand each of these things, and also signpost you of where you can go to find out more. Because again, spending £150 an hour on clinical psychological support is a resource that people don't have access to. So, we're trying to give them an opening, help them understand a little bit more, and then crucially as well, tell them where to go. And Nicola's also sort of offering discounted rates on further support that she can add one-to-one. And she's got her own little business that does a few things like this as well. So, that's kind of where it all came from. Like I said, the 2 big things are just, we wanted to make it as accessible as possible because I don't think it's accessible enough, and just empower the players, because I don't think anyone else is going to do it. So hopefully in the future, but at the moment, we just wanted to do this because it's something I just see all the potential of these people. They're all incredible with people. They can sell, they're disciplined, they're motivated, they're goal orientated. They've got all these amazing attributes to add to businesses. But if they're just focused entirely on the rugby, they're going to be starting from 0 when they exit at an indeterminate sort of point in the future. So that's where it all came from, basically.
Yeah, amazing, mate. Well done, for having the thought and going after it. Now, before we move on to the stash section, if people want to find out more or get in touch with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
Yeah, just tacklingtransition.com is the website. So, go and check it out. Feel free to sort of have a browse through. There's like a free lesson on there that we put in to kind of introduce some of the concepts in the course. And again, there's a contact form. Honestly, I've just had loads and loads of people DMing me on LinkedIn. That's pretty much because I've been talking about it a lot on LinkedIn with a lot of people trying to move careers. It's the place that they begin to all of a sudden panic, hang out on, and try and forge their second career and put the graft in. So yeah, I've had loads of LinkedIn DMs from people. I try and get back to everybody if you're a bit behind, but yeah, feel free to just get in touch. And like I said, it's a real passion project for me. I really believe in it. I've kind of got the bandwidth at the moment to try and do something about it. So.
Okay, great stuff. Let's talk about stash. Geoff, we did this obviously on the first episode that you're on. Have you changed your mind on anything? Are there any new favorite kits that you've got, or any awful ones that have come up since then?
Like I said, I've just been out the game. Do you know what? I had to go and Google a load of kits. And so what I've had to do is go and actually do research. So I don't change my stance at all. It's still France in the 90s, I think is what I said. I think it was the big flowy, baggy, heavy cotton blue jerseys with white collars and the striped arms. That's the nostalgic kit for me. But yeah, beyond that, I'll remain very stubborn on that one, I think.
Okay. And what about any of the new World Cup strips? Have you seen any of those yet?
I've done a drive-by. And I looked at it and I was like, there were two that really stood out. Well, in a good way, and there was one that I thought was absolutely horrendous. So basically, I think Argentina's change kit is absolute filth. Have you seen it? There's like a sash. It looks like a Miss World competition. So it's like a deep blue with a white sash coming over the top of it. Oh, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's just super simple, very, very stylish. And I wrote down, I was like, I think there's like an honourable mention for South Africa's away kit. So for their change kit, they've sort of got a few sort of geometric shapes, a bit jazzy. And then the one that's just the most disappointing thing in the world is like Ireland. It's like they've got an intern to design their kit. Like literally, what are they doing? It's a green T-shirt is what it looks like. I think it's absolutely abysmal. They need to have a look at themselves. They're supposed to be tipped to everyone's thinking that they're going to be in with a shout here. They're playing really well. They're proving a lot of people wrong. They're playing more exciting stuff, and they've gone and painted a T-shirt green. It's embarrassing. If they lift the cup in that, I'd just be devastated. It's not good. Like rugby needs to be more advanced than this. This is exactly what I'm saying.
Very strong opinions, Geoff. I absolutely love it. Now, as we bring this to a close, have you got any other sort of like closing thoughts or anything else you'd just like to say?
No, I think just on the transition stuff is like, it's not just for the elites. Like I think anyone who plays rugby, they understand what a special game it is. There's so much you can't explain to a non-rugby person, and in that is why it's very, very hard to stop playing. So I just think anyone should really, really take it seriously. There's a lot of people that are going to be forced into transitioning very quickly at the moment from the more professional and elite side of things. But it's not an issue that's just for them. So yeah, if the course can be of any help to anyone, or even just understanding the 7 things that we talk about in the course, it might just prove really, really valuable for someone, and it will just help them extract so much more enjoyment from the thing, like their passions and everything else that surrounds them in the rest of their lives. So yeah, please check it out, and just look at being proactive with it, because rugby is an amazing game, and in that way it's kind of the risk at the same time. So yeah, and feel free to reach out if they've got anything you want to talk about with me as well.
Yeah, amazing, mate. Thank you so much. And everything we've spoken about today will be linked up in the show notes, which you can find at amateurrugbypodcast.com. So it just leaves me to say, Geoff, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me back. Really loved it.
Okay, there he goes. It's a massive, massive subject, and it's a massive problem for quite a lot of people. So fantastic work, Geoff. I'm really pleased that you're going about helping, trying to solve it. Now, the Great Rugger Run is less than 2 weeks away, and I'm getting ever more nervous about running 1,000,000 meters across Wales, from West Wales all the way to Gloucestershire, trying to visit over 170 clubs this year, all in aid of the My Name's Doddy Foundation, the Forehead Campaign, and the Freddie Crisp Trust. So at the moment, just follow along on the socials, get involved if you can, share all the content that I'm putting out, and that's at The Great Rugger Run on Instagram and Facebook, and at Rugger Run on Twitter. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, you can do all the social stuff, all of that stuff. I love all that. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. So until then, get out and play.